special council meeting open at 7:23 p.m, and I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to say thank you so much for those who have been here since 6:30 p.m. waiting for this meeting to commence. We can never quite tell how long our annual general meeting will go. Sometimes it's 15 minutes, sometimes it's an hour and 20. You got the hour and 20 this evening, so you can never quite be sure how many people will turn up and speak. So thank you so much for your patience. We have a full house tonight, so we don't have any apologies or members on approved leave of absence. So we will move straight to public question time, an opportunity for you to come forward and speak on this item. There is no set order, it's just whoever wishes to approach first. We do ask that you state your name and the suburb in which you reside. And we do ask that you speak for up to 3 minutes, and just noting that I have had a request from Kids Galore's representative, David from Element, to speak for up to 5 minutes, and that request I have granted in advance of tonight's meeting, given the impact of the applicant, of the Kids Galore in this particular matter. So whoever wishes to speak, please do come forward.
Yes, is this on? Thank you, Madam Mayor and councillors. David Reid from Element, 191 St George's Terrace, Perth, and I'm here tonight representing the owners of Kids Galore for agenda item 5.1. This is a significant decision before you tonight, given the extensive history of the site, where it has been used for care and education of children for over 65 years. As many of you know, the site at Lot 9 Haines Street was gifted by Mr James Hewitt and transferred to the City of Perth on the 2nd of March 1927. It wasn't until the 21st of October 1941, some 14 years after he had died, when it was included in a deed of trust for recreation for the people, and then, only 5 years later, on the 26th of August 1946, the City of Perth Council resolved to abandon the land being used as a playground and resolved to make it available for a kindergarten, but never fixed the deed of trust. The City of Perth didn't fund the kindergarten either. It was the local community who set up the North Perth Kindergarten Committee and ran paddies, markets and fêtes to raise over £947 to build the kindergarten, which later opened in 1954. The site was then run as a kindergarten by the Kindergarten Association until 1973, when the Western Australian School Board was established under the Preschool Education Act, and the facility transferred to the Education Department and renamed the North Perth Preschool. In 1983, this name changed to Kyilla Pre-Primary, and the Education Department formally sought a 5-year lease from the Perth City Council. However, the deed of trust was discovered, making it impossible for a formal lease to be entered into. This was somehow decided to be resolved by some sort of informal leases running every 5 years between the Perth City Council and the Education Department. In 1994, the City of Perth boundaries were amended, and the then town of Vincent inherited the issue and presumably had at least one lease extension with the Education Department. In 2002, Kyilla Pre-Primary was relocated to Kyilla Primary School on Selkirk Street, and the town basically went to market to lease the facility. This lease was won by Kids Galore, and an 18-year lease entered into, despite the previous 5-year lease limits and the deed of trust clearly being noted on the title. So the trust was never resolved by the City of Perth on at least 2 documented occasions. It was never resolved by any of these lease extensions with the Education Department, and was never resolved by the former town of Vincent either. In 2012, based on the encouragement of a former mayor and administration, the city approached Kids Galore and encouraged them to invest in the growth of the facility, as the city realised it needed to provide its community with a greater access to quality childcare facilities. This resulted in Kids Galore upgrading the parking in the Eaton Street Road Reserve and investing in a new building on the site at a cost of some $700,000. Kids Galore accepted the good faith of the city's verbal undertakings that the lease would be extended for the maximum term under the Local Government Act when it came up for renewal, in order to achieve the required level of return on its investment. Again, there was no mention of the deed of trust as part of any of the planning or building approvals granted by the city. The owners of Kids Galore have always acted in good faith with all its dealings with the city, and have been an exemplary partner with the city, maintaining the city's ageing asset with new air conditioning, ceilings, painting, landscaping, etc., and never once ever being late on a lease payment. In 2016, Kids Galore knew of the impending lease end at the end of December 2020 and took a twofold approach to ensure continued childcare services for the local community. The first was to purchase 84 Ellesmere Street with a view to building a new facility, and second, it approached the city to potentially purchase the Kyilla site. This triggered the city's first acknowledgement to Kids Galore of the existence of the deed of trust and the restrictions under the Charitable Trust Act. It's now some 3.5 years later. The Ellesmere Street application was refused by JDAP 32 on the recommendation of the city's planners, but it's finally really nice to be before you tonight with the first recommendation trying to provide some assistance to Kids Galore. We fully support the recommendation before you tonight. However, our preference would be for the second point to refer to support in principle of the development plan rather than endorse it. We believe the transition plan being approved by the Attorney-General is a critical element before we can move forward together. Should this extension not be granted to allow for an orderly transition, then we may be seeking Council's assistance on some other alternative, noting the current Kids Galore enrolments, the history of the land and the immense local community support for the facility. I can assure Council that Kids Galore is committed to finding an alternative site as soon as funds are available from the sale of the Ellesmere Street property, and they look forward to one day having a freehold facility in the city of Vincent. We also want our community to understand that Kids Galore is incredibly thankful for the love and support it has received from its local community during this process, including the support to potentially move to the Sidney Street side of the property. However, the cost of relocation and the risks around the ongoing lease or purchase of this site are extensive, and therefore Kids Galore are fully supportive of the principles outlined in tonight's recommendation before you. Finally, we'd like to personally thank the Council, but in particular you, Madam Mayor, for your considerable time and professional manner in which you have continually faced and dealt with the matter. We are incredibly grateful for the recommendation before Council tonight, and we hope the Council support the recommendation also. We look forward to working with the City to seek the approval of the Attorney-General for the extension of the lease and transition of Kids Galore to an alternative site where it can continue to offer an outstanding childcare service to your community. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Can I just ask you one question? You said in your comments that you would prefer that we adopt the development plan in principle, but I note that we're adopting a draft for public consultation. I'm just trying to understand why you've put that forward.
It was just around the word endorse the development plan. That development plan may change if the transition plan doesn't get supported by the Attorney-General, which I think is the last part of the recommendation for 2, which is kind of what you're recommending anyway. But that development plan, we may need to come and seek an approval of some sort of alternate for that development plan. If we don't get the Attorney-General's approval within, could be 6 months, then we've got 6 months to try and find an alternative. We might be looking for some other alternative on that.
Okay, I'll address that later, but I think the intent here is for this to be able to move forward if this is endorsed by the Attorney-General, so that it doesn't have to come back to Council. It can smoothly move forward. So it is time saving potentially, but I'll ask some questions just to clarify that during the debate.
Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please. Declarations of interest. We have received none on this item, so we will go straight to the item. It is item 5.1, Haines Street Reserve Development Plan, number 15 Haines Street, numbers 25 and 31 Sidney Street, North Perth. Can I please have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I'm not going to speak extensively about it. It's gone on for a very long time. I will note that there are some comments in the report in relation to the decision-making process or some of the decisions around it. The issue of the trust, as far as I'm aware, was first discussed in some correspondence in 2016. As far as I'm aware, it took until 2018 for at the request of Kids Galore to get some action via elected members to actually get a response, and it wasn't until 2019 until some of the information was actually formally presented to Council. So there's some that in itself is a lengthy period of time, notwithstanding the comments Mr. Reid made about the existence on site prior to that. The key thing for me here is that we have a recommendation that, in my understanding of Council's view of the trust, that whilst I didn't personally support the same view when this last came to Council in 2019, it was Council's view of the trust. The recommendation that supports that view is being supported by Kids Galore, and the proprietors of Kids Galore should be, in my opinion, thanked and applauded for being able to bring along their community with them to that level of support, because clearly when we are dealing with, particularly with kids and with kids and their development and education, it's very personal to most people, and it's not a difficult thing to manage. It's been a lot of tense meetings and discussions. At the heart of it all, for the owners of Kids Galore is a business interest as well, and that also brings with it its own stresses. So I think that the fact we've got a recommendation here before us that is wholly supported by Kids Galore is something that I'm happy to support. I know there's a couple of amendments there, but I'll let the debate flow. You can't move amendments, can you, Mayor Cole? No, all right. Well, I'll let the Speaker second the speakers I have to do, and then we can move to the amendments thereafter.
I'll go to the seconder. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. Yes, it has been an issue that really was one of the initial issues that came before myself and other new councillors in that early part of, I think, 2018, and quite an intensive look. It's been a lot of consultation through with the owners of Kids Galore and the local community, and I think with the community forums that were held last year, the two forums, we saw really quite a diverse range of opinions on the issue. But I'm glad to see that through continued communication that we've been able to offer more clarity in that on what that deed of trust actually means. And I think there was some misunderstanding in the very early days as to Council's ability to amend that. And I think we dealt with that last year. I think what we're dealing with now is a significant move forward, and now to get to the stage of being able to seek the approval of the Attorney-General. There are, within that amendment, some clarity in terms of how that's to proceed moving forward, and I think also the clarity of a more extended, more definite term in terms of when that lease shall expire. So I think the proposed amendments, and I'll allow Councillor Toppelberg to place that, but I'm supportive of the motion in front, and I'm supportive of the amendment should that actually be placed to us to discuss.
Councillors, you wish to speak, Councillor Toppelberg? Would others like to speak before an amendment comes forward? I think you have the floor.
I move the amendment on the what?
I'll just call for a seconder to the amendment. Councillor Fotakis.
I think it provides clarity of the intent. It also provides some clear, clear points for the community, for the Attorney-General, for the city and for Kids Galore along that path without requirements for new leases or coming back to Council on multiple occasions, which I think is just fraught with administrative angst for little reason. That to me, what's there is clear in terms of what is being sought, and that is effectively a 2-year check-in to make sure that things are moving as they should be, and the opportunity 2 years later to have clarity, regardless of whether a new premises exists or otherwise, that Kids Galore will be vacating the site by the intended date, which is the 31st of December, 2025.
Councillor Fotakis, do you wish to speak to the amendment?
I just note that the addition of some, not only the clarity, but that point 4.5, which actually states the failure of the lessee to provide the required information to a satisfactory standard by the timeframe specified within will result in termination of the lease. And I think that I think just adds a little bit more of a confirmation and satisfaction to the community. We're not only offering that the 5-year lease, but those touch points of 2 and 4 years, and the conditions in there, it's very clearly stated, so I'm happy to support it.
Councillors, I'll speak to it given I put it forward. I think that for me, in going through this process and in terms of putting through a transitional arrangement to provide certainty to the users of the Kids Galore childcare, if we say that we're looking at a 5-year lease extension to allow that transitional time frame, 5 years from December this year, so we're looking at approximately 6 years. I think it's very important that we actually grant that 5 years so that there's no concern in the Kids Galore families that in some way in 2 years' time this could potentially be just a 2-year lease. I wanted to really ensure that we gave that surety, and I think that is also the fact that council has come to, this council has dealt with this issue, and as David Reid has outlined, there is a very long history here, and I think that we really need to bring certainty to this and not have this necessarily coming back to council in 2 years and 4 years, that this council has finally found a way forward, and we need to be clear and make a clear decision this evening. So I thought that the 5-year lease provided that certainty and that clarity about what we are actually putting forward. It does need to go through to the Attorney-General for approval, and I thought that it was important to put this forward as our best foot forward. If the Attorney-General wishes to raise issue or discuss that, then we can deal with that in a further report to Council, but we will hopefully be seeking support for the 5-year lease. It is something that will have to come to Council, the full lease, for approval, and I think at that time we'll also need to look at the fact that if Kids Galore did find an alternate site and wish to leave early, we will need to look at termination clauses so that they are able to exit the lease earlier if they wish, because I think this is also not about tying Kids Galore to the 5 years, and that, you know, if they do have the opportunity to move on sooner, that we wouldn't necessarily say that we want to hold you to this full 5 years. So hence the amendment. Any further comments? Councillor Castle?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, look, I support this amendment as well for many of the reasons that have been discussed. I do think it's important that what we have here, in my opinion, strikes a balance between certainty for Kids Galore and for their community and for this council, and also a very clear intention for the purposes of seeking approval from the Attorney-General. The conditions, I think, are very important in that respect, because I think we need to be very clear that everyone knows what this transition plan is designed to achieve. And I completely agree that when this lease does come before us again for approval, that those clauses around both the 2 and 4 year check-ins and the ability for Kids Galore to exit early if they find a suitable alternative in a shorter period of time is very important, both for their position and also for that seeking approval from the Attorney-General. So, yep, I support this amendment.
Any further comments before I put the amendment? Councillor Fotakis, I think you've seconded the amendment, so you've already spoken, but you can speak. No, I think you've already spoken to the substantive. Okay, you can ask a question later. Does anyone who hasn't spoken wish to speak to the amendment? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Councillors? I assume you're asking a question, not
That's
closing
exactly
debate.
Right. No, absolutely. I'm asking a question. Just in relation to the comment from the gallery about the skate element, am I correct that what is shown, and there were higher resolution plans provided later, but am I correct that what is proposed is listed as a figure 8 scooter course, and can we get some explanation as to what a figure 8 scooter course is and how it may differ from a skatable element in a park?
Through Mayor Cole, I mean, essentially it is a skatable element to be skated by a scooter. but I guess it wasn't intended to be a significant facility where it's going to be attracting that kind of use, more of a incidental use of for people who are already riding the tracks and traversing through the area.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that? So what sort of age group? I mean, I sort of thought this was like a figure-8 scooter track as opposed to sort of a deep bowl that teenagers may skate. Is this designed to be for younger children, or what sort of age group do you think would be using this element?
I think for this one, there's not a lot of detail in the plan itself, so it's probably something that we'll hash out through the community consultation and get a bit of an idea on balancing the age groups across the entire site, because something that came out in the initial consultation was that the community wanted basically facilities for all ages. So if we have more, say, teen or adult infrastructure in other areas, then we can balance this one to be more for younger kids and vice versa.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, Councillor Castle?
Thank you, Mac. I'll just have a follow-up question for the manager. Perhaps for the purpose of the public gallery, but also for us, could you just briefly outline what the plan is in terms of consultation with this development plan? Because as you mentioned, we've had an initial round of consultation, but that was very much tied to the other discussions around the lease tenure and the trust. So we do have a little bit of initial feedback about what people would like to see on this site, but what's the plan in terms of going out for further consultation with this development plan?
So if it's endorsed tonight or supported, the first thing that we need to do is go to the Attorney General and get that support, or assuming it's support, then we'll go straight to public advertising. We would advertise to the same people that we advertised the initial proposal through largely the same methods, as well as anyone who made a submission on the initial development plan as well. What would be released for public comment is basically those 3 pages of attachment: the ultimate layout, the transition plan, and the landscaping plan. So it all forms part of the development plan. And in doing so, it also then gives council the ability at the next council meeting, where they formally approve the entire package, to modify any of those elements in accordance with the community submissions. The other thing to consider is if the Attorney General proposes any modifications or says he would support it only with modification, then instead of going straight back out to the community, we would propose to bring it back to council as soon as possible, showing those modifications. And similarly, if the Attorney General refuses the entire plan as it is and says we can't do anything with the 15 Haines Street site, then again we would bring that back to council with either an amended plan or some other way forward.
Councillors, Councillor Castle, do you wish to speak to the motion?
I'll just briefly mention that I'm in full support of this motion, particularly as amended. I think, as we've seen, there's been a long history, and I'm very happy to see a resolution that is acceptable and supported to Kids Galore, because as we've seen, they are a very valuable member of our community. I hope that they're able to find a future location in the city of Vincent, and just hopefully this particular plan will be approved by the Attorney General so that we can move forward with what's been outlined.
Councillors? Look, I'll speak to it. I think it is definitely one of the most difficult issues that I've dealt with, certainly as Mayor and probably in the last 6 years on council, because it is not easy to actually go to a very well-loved and well-run a quality childcare centre and talk to the parents and families, some with babes in arms, about the fact that their childcare centre may not have a future on that site. That's incredibly difficult. But I think that what we've been able to do here is to really strike a balance with going to the Attorney-General to say, yes, this land is subject to this deed. I think there's been some very sloppy practices in the past in not being aware of that deed, and I think that we are trying to now honour that, but we're also trying to be very pragmatic and practical about that and say we have a very valuable community service on site that is very well used by mostly local families of the City of Vincent who rely on that service. They rely on it to go to work, but they also rely on it because they feel that that is a safe place to take their children, and that's an incredibly valuable thing that many of us on this council know, because a lot of us have gone through or still using childcare. So that in and of itself is very difficult, but I think for the sake of Mary here tonight, who's not quite sure what is being proposed, what we are proposing is that the existing lease with Kids Galore ends at the end of this year. We have talked extensively with Kids Galore about providing a 5-year transition plan to allow Kids Galore to remain on the current site. That is why we do need to go to the Attorney-General, because we do need the Attorney-General to approve us to allow the childcare centre to remain on site, which is in breach of the deed, as we now know. We have discussed this with Kids Galore, and it is fantastic to hear that they do support this proposal, because they do feel that in effect 6 years from now is sufficient time for them to find their forever home. It is something that Kids Galore has been trying to do, and we did see that experience on Ellesmere Street, which was very difficult, and we understand that Kids Galore is very keen to move forward and find a new location within the City of Vincent, which is great news for the parents and for us, because Kids Galore has been a fantastic tenant, and we'd love to see them continue to offer this service within the City of Vincent. So in reaching this place, I hope that the parents will understand that we are trying to ensure that there is no disruption to the service, that we are really trying to find something that's workable and practical, and that does that in a way that really, hopefully, in the future we can support Kids Galore to find that permanent home that they have been seeking. It is also worth mentioning that there are 2 other current services on site. We currently have a dentist and a building lease to the Department of Health. We have offered to meet with them. They've said that they accept that the lease is coming to an end in approximately 18 months' time, and that they will find another alternate, and have opted not to meet with us to discuss. They seem to have come to a place of acceptance around that. And the other group that we do have on site is a playgroup, which is actually a community use and is consistent with recreational land and could continue on this site. But over the last few years, their numbers have dwindled, and we will be talking to them about whether they might like to relocate to one of our newly refurbished playgroups in Highgate, Mount Hawthorn, or even potentially at the Loftus Community Centre. So we will be working with the playgroup, because that is actually an important community function as well. So it has been a difficult path to find an outcome that suits and works, and I'm very happy to try to knock on the door of the Attorney-General and to try to guide this through if I can, if I'm able to speak to someone in the office to talk about our perspective and why we think this is the best solution and how we think it can work. Because in all of these issues, you do need to be very focused on solving problems in a way that allows for transition, and I think that's an important lesson, that you can't just look at something on a page and say that's legally problematic and must be brought to an end on this date, because it affects people, it affects children, and it affects our community. The other piece that really does need to be talked about, and I mentioned it at the annual electors meeting, is the fact that this has been informed by our public open space strategy, which was a really important document for the City of Vincent in terms of our strategic thinking around green space and open space for our community as we densify and move forward. And this is an incredibly valuable piece of land for recreation in the City of Vincent. This is not a piece of land we could replicate and find and purchase elsewhere. The size of the land, the fact that it's north facing, that it's actually in an area identified under our strategy as requiring more open space as our community grows. So it wasn't a matter of simply saying this land we can sell and purchase elsewhere. It is actually in a prime location and in situation, so that was really important consideration as well. So I just like to say thank you to Kids Galore for continuing the conversation with us, and to say that this is a process that we will continue to shepherd, and that we are very conscious of the timing. We are conscious of the fact that the current lease expires in December, and that we do need to keep this moving, and that the conversation now really shifts to our community to talk about what the open space looks like in the future, and discussions around whether we do need to have a scooter 8-figure 8, or what that does bring, and what the community actually really want to see there. So what we're putting out to the community is really a starting point for discussion. It's certainly not set in stone, and I think that now that this issue is potentially being dealt with in terms of the services on site, it actually paves the way for a much more rigorous discussion with the community about what they'd actually like to see in that parkland. So it is very reassuring to be here and to hear the full support from Kids Galore in making what is a fundamentally difficult decision around continuation of services, and I hope that in future we can actually be supportive of Kids Galore in trying to give some early advice about location of land, etc., moving forward, and be very happy to do what we can there. So it is good to bring this to a point where we are reaching a decision, and that we can now, I think, safely take this forward to the Attorney-General and strongly argue that it is the right decision, and that we do require support for this to move forward. Thank you. Are there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the substantive motion. We're now voting on the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. We do have another item this evening. It is item 6.1, adoption of program fees and charges for the Loftus Community Centre. Could I please have a mover and seconder? Move Councillor Hallett, seconded Councillor Loden.
Thank you. Happy to support the officer's recommendation. It's great that we're being able to continue a lot of these important services at the cost that people are already paying, and so there'll be very little, if any, disruption to service, continuation of, access to these facilities, and I look forward to seeing it continue to be successful, and whatever happens in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett. Councillor Loden. Does anyone wish to speak to the fees and charges for Loftus Community Centre? No? Okay, I'll just echo your comments, Councillor Hallett. I'm pleased that we are able to step in and continue this service. I think that it's important to keep the fees as is at this time when we're transitioning, and trying to ensure that people feel that the service looks and feels the same, and that they feel that they're returning to a place that they've grown to really feel comfortable and enjoy. So I think this is part of that transitional arrangement. Unless there are any further comments, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. So that completes the business for this evening's special council meeting. So I'll declare the meeting closed at 7:59 a.m. Thank you, everyone. Did I say a.m.? So embarrassing. p.m.